Hello everybody, welcome to the video, The Psychology of Money, Finances. Over these past couple of weeks, I have been talking about finances and money from different perspectives in my classes, and I've also been thinking about it. I've always thought this topic of psychology and money and psychology is a very interesting one. So we're gonna dig into 15 different points that I'm going to be discussing in this video, and hopefully by the end of it you'll have a better grasp on money, as well as maybe tips that you can take away from this video to help you in your finances and in your psychology as well. So let's get started. First, I'm going to try to define money. So I've been talking about money for the past couple of weeks, like I just mentioned, and my students in general just say it's a type of way. It's obviously like paper or it can be digital, but it's a way to exchange goods and services. And I'm going to be talking about goods, services, and ideas as we go on. But I also heard somewhere, I don't remember where, and I actually asked ChatGPT about this, but it is also a legal government document that backs you up, right? Like basically, if you go to the government with money, they are obligated to back you up, right? So it's not like the barter system back in the day where you could trade like a chicken for a chicken or a cow for a chicken, right? This is a type of consensus, I guess we could say, implicit consensus that we all reach. And this way we kind of have that money, right? Now, the legal document, because at the end of the day, if you think about money as a paper, it is a legal document. It's based on trust, right? And it's crazy because our society or societies in the world typically aren't very trustworthy. They don't trust individuals, right? But they do trust a piece of paper, right? So that's kind of like ironic. And the reason they trust a piece of paper is because implicitly they're trusting the government, right? So even if like the hardest anarchist, if the hardest anarchist out there is still spending money, is using money, they're ultimately trusting the government, right? That's basically what that is. So it's based on trust, on political stability, which the government takes care of, and the implicit consensus among individuals, right? Among people. So again, it's not a commodity. It's not like gold or chickens. They call it fiat money, right? So that's the first point. Now, let's get a little bit into the psychology of it. The second point is the question, I think, on everybody's mind now, especially if you clicked on this video. How do emotions affect spending and saving patterns, right? So in this, we're going to add a couple of emotions. First, I'm going to start off with pleasure and guilt. Pleasure and guilt are emotions that we can experiment or experience whenever we do either one of the two things, right? So let's say you spend money, right? And you spend it because you want a nice hamburger. So you get pleasure from it, right? But then you feel guilty because you weren't supposed to spend that money. You were supposed to save it, right? Now, if you save the money, maybe you feel guilty because you're not allowing yourself the pleasure of having the hamburger, right? But long term, you will feel pleasure because you have that financial security, right? So I think a lot of the spending and saving habits have to do ultimately with this relationship between pleasure and guilt, right? You either have pleasure from spending or from saving, or you feel guilty from saving or from spending, right? Now, other emotions, these emotions are kind of like the after effect, right, of spending or saving. But there are emotions that will firstly get you to spend or to save. For example, I think, and let me know what you think about this, if you're happy or you're sad, you tend to spend more, right? So if you're sad, for example, you're going to want to spend money to cheer yourself up, right? And typically sad people are alone. So they'll want to get something good to eat. They'll want to maybe go to the movies or something like that. They'll want to buy something expensive, right, to kind of fill that hole. in their hearts or something like that. And if you're happy, you're typically with people, you're euphoric, and you're spending money, right? You're partying. Yeah, I'll pay for that, guys. Like, don't worry about it. Next round's on me type of ordeal, right? If you're angry, fearful, or disgusted, you don't spend, right? And if any of you have seen Inside Out, you know I'm talking about the 5 basic emotions from that movie. If you're angry, you don't want to spend. You know, you're actually like against spending, right? So you'll probably save the money. If you're fearful, same, right? You're fearful about, about ending up without money, and you're disgusted. Everything makes you disgusted, right? Like the food, the clothes, whatever. You don't want anything, right? So you tend not to spend. Now, there's this notion, and I was reading this article. It's called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And in it, he talks about what people, and I've heard this lately, like the story you tell yourself about whatever. So what is the story you tell yourself about money, right? And your shopping preferences. How often do you shop for clothes, for example? How often do you need a new pair of shoes? How often do you need new pants? How often do you buy new pants, right? How often do you want to buy new pants, right? There are people that think that money is hard to get, and there are people that think it's just a consequence of what you're doing, right? And those are two very different extreme positions. People that think money's hard to get typically aren't good with money or have a hard time getting it, right? And people that say, oh yeah, it's just a side effect of the hustle, of the hard work that I'm constantly doing. They don't even care or worry about money, and they have money, right? This phrase of like it's a consequence or it's a side effect comes from Harvey Specter from the series Suits, right? Where it's just like you just work, focus on your work, and money is just kind of there, but I don't really worry about it because I'm so busy working, right? In the article, Morgan also talks about gaining or losing money is emotional. People will talk about money as it's not so important or as it's not correlated or associated with many other walks of life when it really is. So just think about a person that hits the jackpot or finds money on the ground, right? It affects their emotional mood. They get happy. Or someone that loses money, like in a bet, or just can't find the $100 bill or whatever that they left around the house. They get upset, they get sad, right? So this plays, or the reason this article says this is emotional is because it plays on your ego, and it plays on you being right or wrong. So the emotion is tied to logic. Think about a bet, right? If you bet, or think about a business, right? You risk your investments or your savings in a business, and you end up losing the money, right? That means you were wrong, right? You were wrong to try to make or to try to bring that business about, or you were wrong about the way in which you try to bring that business about. So that plays on your ego, excuse me, and it ultimately plays on your future stability, right? Think about I don't know, think about your job. If all of a sudden you got laid off, or you got hours cut from your shift or whatever. This is kind of happening to me right now, and it does get you in a very emotional in a very emotional state. And I was asking myself kind of like why, because I just recently got hours cut from one of my jobs, and it does get you very emotional, and it's not only because of the money. I mean, the money's like the thing, but it's also because it does play on your ego. It plays on who you are as a person. It's like, what am I doing wrong? Why are you doing this to me? You're asking yourself, like, or you want to ask like your boss or the people that are in charge of giving you your work shift, right? So ultimately, he says why the stories we tell ourselves are wrong, right? Because there's a distinction here, a very clear distinction, which is like humans, we tend to live in this like ideal world, and it's basically fueled by the word should, right? The way things should be. And when reality hits with the way things are or the way it is, that should comes into conflict with the is, right? So basically, the author is like, just let go of the should, right? Or your moral, if it's like what must be, what should be, because it's not. That's not reality. Just focus on your on reality and the stories you tell yourself, which I think when people talk about the stories you tell yourself, it's kind of like what you understand from for related to that topic, right? Like if it's money, what do you understand about money? How do you get it? How do you spend it? How do you save it? You know, everything that has everything that's related to money, you know, that's the story about money, right? And you have stories about many different things, right? Like what's your story about love? What do you tell yourself about love, about friendship, about family, about work, right? About money in this case. um, so again, we're fighting that should, we're fighting with our should, and we just need to let go of that should and look at what it is, right? I mean, the should does I guess benefit us because it drives an ideal and a motivation, right? It gives us direction towards like more prosperous, towards like a more prosperous future. But if it's not what we're actually living in the moment, it's going to come into conflict and it's going to interfere with our attempt to try to make a clear cut story, right? Or a clean cut story. So that's the second point, and that's ultimately in the article, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. He says something very interesting also that kind of stuck with me. He says, define the cost of success and be ready to pay it. And I think for any of you, kind of like me, that have always wanted success in our lives, I guess if you don't have success, it's because you're not willing to pay the price. Like really sit down and think about this. Like if I were to ask myself, what would it take for me to get to be successful? You know, are you willing to pay the price, right? Because you need to pay the price. And this is not talking about money per se. This is more talking about like your stability, your health, right? You're going to have to put yourself out there. Things are going to get risky, right? That type of cost is the one I'm talking about. Okay, so the third point is starting a business. If you want to start a business, could you? And if you could, how would you go about it? Now, there are many different ways to start a business. I was recently seeing in class that there's like crowdfunding, investors, loans you could take out from the bank. You can ask friends or family. You can have business partners. You can save the money yourself, right? Crowdfunding, I think, is a very good way because it basically draws people in that are interested in your business idea, and they just kind of give you the money in exchange for some type of gift or some type of symbolic representation. Like I saw in this article that this one girl put up like a cat cafe, and I guess they have cats in the cafe, and one of the investors gave her like $20,000, and she named the cat after her, or she like, you know, like symbolically, like kind of like when you buy stars, you know, you could buy stars in the universe, but it's like symbolic, you know, you get like your certificate and everything, and you have to pay like $50 or something like that. So kind of like that, more symbolic gestures, right? There are a lot of ways. So how would you go about it? How would you raise the money, right? Can you make money without money? Because a lot of people think you need to have the money in order to start a business, but you actually don't. And this is where your social skills and your creativity are really going to come in handy, because if you're able to start a business without any money, then you're very creative, right? Because ultimately you get other people to put up their money, right? Excuse me. So would you take out a loan? We're going to talk about loans and interests in point number 13. Or you could just save up the money like I mentioned. Now, for all of this, I've actually read, I finished one and I'm reading another one. So I'm reading 2 books on how to make a business plan. And I'm asking you this question: how important do you think is a business plan when you start a business, right? Like, and you do a business plan initially. You can do a business plan either initially, like when you're just starting the business, or before you start the business, or when you want to make changes, like structural changes, if you already have a business, right? And it covers everything from the most basic, like your mission, your vision, your values, to the more complex, like budgeting, marketing, installations, facilities, personnel, right? Like more specific things. And you also need to analyze, like we've heard a million times, you need to analyze the environment, detect the needs. How are you going to provide the satisfaction to those needs, right? And all of this is included in a business plan, and plus you get the projection into the future, so you're able to know how things should be going into the future, right? How everything's going to be turning out. Because what you're trying to do ultimately is reduce risk. When you start a business, there's a lot of risk involved. So I think a business plan is essential, especially for investors, right? Like if you're gonna talk, let's say you don't have the money and you're gonna get the money from someone who has the money. How are you going to convince them, right, that your plan is a good idea? Again, this is where creativity comes in, right? And you need to cover as many bases as you can. Maybe even do like surveys in the community, things like that, right? So I think that's important. So that was point number 3. Point number 4, I wanted to talk about Game of Thrones. So in season 7, Cersei Lannister, who is the queen of Westeros at this point, she owes, well, her family, the Lannister family, she owes a lot of money to the Bank of Westeros, right? And it's funny because she has a sit down with one of the bank people, and she tells them, like, I'm going to pay you back because we just recently got a lot of gold, right? Because they stole it from because they're in the middle of like different wars. And the bank's like, oh, excellent, like that's excellent news. And we're actually willing to give you out more loans and make more business with you, but as soon as you pay us the money, right? So I was like, how is that? Couldn't you just trick the bank and be like, just give me more loans and without paying like the previous loans? And I asked ChatGPT about this, because the bank's all like, we can do business, but first you have to pay me back, right? So how does that work? Basically, the bank is trying to mitigate the risk of loss. So the bank is a business, like we all know. And when they loan out money, they expect that money back with interest, and that's where they make their money. That's what people say. I don't really know how banks really make their money, but that's what they say. They make their money with interest, and it's like, okay, what about people that don't pay, right? But there is a difference here, because one thing is the actual payment, and the other one is a payment promise, right? So they don't care about payment promises. They care about real payment, right? The actual payment. Are you actually paying me back the money? And if you are, then long term we can keep working, right? Because the loaner, right? The loaner, the person that takes out a loan has a repayment record, right? Is your repayment record high or low? Are you actually paying back, right? So you have a proven repayment method, a proven repayment record, and this allows the bank to refinance, right? To be able to loan you money again and again after they have already done it. Okay, so point 5, we're talking about online versus in-person shopping. Which is better? Is it more comfortable for you to shop online and maybe even get instant gratification from just going on Amazon or whatever and buying whatever you want? Or are you talking more about saving and actually having that long-term security because you're able to save, right? So you can buy many things. You can buy services. An example of services is internet, right? It's not a physical thing. You can buy goods like food, shampoo, soap, right? Like physical things. And you can buy ideas, knowledge. This is why you go to school. Um, we could say that ultimately this is also a good, because you get a piece of paper, because you need to prove that you actually studied and you learned things. If not, then the knowledge, I mean, you can use the knowledge, but nowadays there's abundance of knowledge. I think knowledge has actually isn't really that pricey anymore, because you can just go on YouTube and learn about whatever you want. You just need to be disciplined, of course. But there are other ways of making and spending money. Let me give you some examples here. Casinos, right? So you go to a casino and you bet, right? And you can win money, you can gain money, or you can lose money, spend money. You can bet like on sports, right? Which I was actually thinking about like doing. You can do trading. So like in the stock market, you can trade. You can actually do this, and I'm gonna give you a little tip. This is kind of like a psychological tip, but you can buy and sell things, or buy and resell things, right? Excuse me. This is called flipping, right? There's a great series of episodes on YouTube that this guy goes from like 1 cent to like $1,000, and all he does, like when he gets to the hundreds, is he just keeps flipping game consoles like PlayStation 4s and Xboxes. So you can look at it from this perspective when you buy something. If something is expensive, let's say you want to buy a video game console, you can say, okay, I'm going to buy this video game console, but I'm actually only going to pay for the time I use it, because I'm going to sell it again. I'm going to resell it as a used product, obviously. And let's say, let me just give you an example of a figure. This is $4,000, right? And I'm going to sell it for like 2,500. So in reality, you have only spent 1,500. You have only spent 1,500. So it's kind of like you're paying to use the things, right? So that's kind of like a psychological trick. So you're not so hard on yourself, like, oh, I just blew all this money. You're actually paying to use something for a little bit, and then you sell it again, right? Or you resell it to somebody, or you just sell it to somebody, and you get part of the money back. You get most of the money back, especially if not a lot of time has gone by, right? So that's a tip. You can resell it and not lose all of your money. So these are some common expressions from people when I was telling them about money, like, what do you think about money? Some people say it's difficult to get and easy to lose. Obviously, the typical, everything's expensive nowadays, everything is costly, right? More expensive than before. And it's like, okay, a house is a dream for me. I thought this one was kind of interesting because it talks about how like basically impossible it is to get a house nowadays, right? Especially with so much bureaucratic nonsense and trickery. Money is a facilitator, right? So it facilitates the way in which you do things. If we earn more, we spend more. I think that's true. Not necessarily, but people think they need more money all the time because they're up to their limit, and if they make more, they're gonna reach that limit again. So it's kind of like, yeah, like tone it down. You don't really need to be spending that much. Money is the product of your work, right? So this is like a very capital communist perspective, and everybody says this. Everybody says money is important, but it's not the most important thing, right? Which is kind of like they say this in the beginning, but there is a theory here that one of my students actually put out that I'm going to share with you. This person says that people on the extremes, so this means the very rich, the very wealthy, and the very poor, don't worry about money, right? Because they either have it or they don't. The people that worry about it are the people in the middle class people, because they're the ones that have to constantly be dealing with, do I have enough? Do I have enough? Do I have enough? Right? Yeah, I have enough. Do I have enough? Yeah, I have enough. Right? But it kind of makes sense. Let me know what you think about that theory in the comments. Rich people and poor people don't worry about money because they either have it or they don't. It's the people in the middle that do. Okay, now the next question, does money change people? I think that's a very cliche question when it comes to money. And I think it can change you definitely. I've seen a lot of unresolved crimes or mystery crimes or like those type of mysterious crimes or solved crimes in both fiction and nonfiction, specifically Sherlock Holmes, where a lot of these narratives and these stories involve money, right? Either someone was murdered because of vengeance, because of money, or someone was murdered because they were trying to get their money, or, like the end goal in most of these things is typically money, right? So I think it does change people. It shouldn't, but it does, right? Another question, very cliche: does money make you happy? And this is kind of getting more into the realm of what do you like? What do you like to spend your money on? Like I heard this question in one of my classes, like, what do you like to spend your money on? And I thought that was like a very interesting question. It's like, like, do you ever think about that? Like we all know we're busy paying rent, bills, and whatever, but like, what do you like to spend your money on? Do you even like to spend money? Right? Maybe you don't, you know and the question, does money make you happy? I think it does. Like I think there's this meme and they were all laughing about it, the students I had, because they were saying, I'd rather cry in a Ferrari, right? And and it's like, does it make you happy? I think, again, it's how you manage it, and we're gonna get into that in a little bit, because you can have it. You can win the lottery, right? And in a week you lost it all, right? So it made you happy during that week, but then, but I guess that would mean that money made you happy, right? But I think ultimately it comes down into how you handle money. Now, there was this other question which I thought was very like direct, and it's, what is the most expensive thing you own, right? And that kind of puts you out there, because it's like, now you're getting personal and private, and you're talking now about terms of safety and security, right? Because you're not just going to be putting your money out there. And money, for me, is actually, they say the taboo topics in society are politics and religion, but I think it's actually money, right? Money is actually what can put you in danger, right? So that's something that you shouldn't really be talking about in public. But anyway, let's get into the budgeting and saving aspect of things. Now, if you borrow or lend money, you can, I guess, say that in a way you can make business off that, right? You kind of operate like a bank. Excuse me. So you're able to say, okay, I'm going to lend you so much money, and this is the interest rate per month or per week or whatever. But I guess that's kind of like what those movies then talk about, where they have like a bouncer or some security guard that's like with the person, right? Making sure that they pay back the money, because let's be honest, a lot of people, if you were to borrow money to people, it would be really hard to get it back from them, I think, unless you had like a very close relationship with them, or unless they were really honest and had very high morals. But okay, here we're talking about budgeting, and I'm gonna get at the end of this video into 7 tips or 7 ways in which you can budget in case you're having a hard time with that. So I heard something interesting, because when we were talking about budgeting in class, some people were saying that, it's hard for them to budget because emergencies pop up, right? Especially if you have kids, like they'll get sick, they'll need shoes, things like that. And I'm like, yeah, that's hard. But then I heard someone say, you know what, if there's an emergency, I put off that emergency, right? Like I'll deal with it next month, because this month I have to save, right? And I was like, whoa, like that's some discipline, right? Like imagine if you're sick and you need to go to the doctor, but you're like, yeah, this money is not for the doctor or for an emergency. This is for me to save it, and I'm just gonna save it, right? And I'll just like have a cup of hot water or tea or whatever. But I'm gonna get into this one, because budgeting, I think, also leads to long-term planning, because first you need to make a list of your expenses, right? And so you think about this, you sit down, and you can do this with any sort of planning, like, what are the activities I need to do this weekend? Boom, 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 boom. You write them down. What are my expenses for the month? Rent, food, transportation, whatever. You write all that down, right? So the first thing you need to do when you organize yourself or you budget is make a list, right? And then right next to it, write down the amount of money you're spending on it, right? So the question here would be, are you over budget or where are you under budget? So a graph I saw this week was it's 3 columns. The first one is the budget. It's the amount of money you have for this. And then it's the actual money that you spent on it. And then there's a third column, which is called the variance. So the variance is the difference, right? So let's say you have so much money for transportation, but you actually go over budget, you end up spending more, so then you're in negative. The variance is negative, right? You end up owing. But then you can compensate for it in another area or in another category, where in that other category, you actually didn't spend all the money that you had for that because you actually spent less. So you're in positive in that area. So then you can take money from that category and pay the other category. And I think that's kind of like how business works, because that's mass, up, down, right, left, front and back type of budgeting across time, across space, across different incomes. And that type of budgeting it's crazy. Individual budgeting is sometimes crazy too. Like, just think about the fact that some people have like 2 or 3 jobs or get paid on different days or have different expenses, right? So I think ultimately it does mean that, and it doesn't help that a lot of people say they're bad at math, because all of this involves math, complex math, right? I don't even know if it has to do with like algebra math or what type of math, but at least I know you're adding and subtracting across different categories, right? And that's complex, right? Because it's multiple categories. So yeah, if you're bad at math, I don't think you're going to be, I don't know if there's someone that's bad at math but good at budgeting, or bad at math and good with money, right? I think there are people that are good at math and bad with money, right? But that's maybe for emotional reasons. So yeah, this is across time and across goods and services. And my question here is, how into the future do you budget? Do you budget considering 1 month, 1 week, bi-weekly, right? And are you ahead or back, right? Because, for example, we're gonna get into credit in a moment, but I think like if you have a credit card, so you're able to, some people get a credit card because they just want to spend money, but some people get a credit card because they want to have a credit history, right? So with credit card, you're typically 1 month behind, right? Because you owe that money for next month, right? And you're typically operating like 1 month behind. But if you're paying everything on time, you stay in that 1 month behind, and that's as far back as you go on credit, right? If you go back 2 months, now you're owing interest and you get in trouble, right? Your credit history takes a hit. That's not good, especially if you're working for your credit history. So then you can take out like a loan for a house or a car or something like that in the future. But yeah, there may be some people that are like 1 month ahead. They may have credit, but they also have the money to pay the credit each month ahead, right? Which could also work. I mean, that's ultimately how credit should be handled, but I'll get into that in a moment. You also need to consider annual and yearly fees and bills, right? For example, insurance. Insurance is something that is paid yearly for most people, or at least in Mexico. Another thing is called the refrendo or tenencia, and this is something that you pay for having a car or a motorcycle or some form of transportation. You need to pay this every year, right? So if you budget monthly, you need to consider this into your, take the payment that you're gonna make every year and divide it among the 12 months. And that's the little extra that you have to be putting towards that every month. All the same thing with insurance, right? Because otherwise you're gonna get to the next year, right? And all of a sudden you're gonna have to pay this money out of nowhere, right? Because Again, you didn't plan for it, right? This is kind of stupid, but there's a tax. It's a tax. It's ultimately a transportation tax. I think there's also a property tax that you have to pay if you have land or a house every year. You pay tax when you buy things, when you sell things, and just for having things, right? There's a tax for everything. Okay, so financial education is ultimately prioritizing bills like rent, food, water bill, cell phone, internet bill, right? All of these type of bills is prioritizing them or putting them. I'm gonna get into that in a little bit in the tips, but it's like putting them first, right? Like this is the stuff I need to pay, regardless of anything that's going on in my life. So I need to have the money for rent, for food, right? These type of things, and ultimately that's how you get financially educated. A lot of people talk about how in school we're not really financially educated, or we're not financially educating students, right, for the real world, like budgeting. But I'll do it in this video. That's what you got to do. You got to prioritize and make a list, right, of the things you need to pay. So in this moment, well, this is another question. When do you do that? Or do you even do that? Do you do that in the moment that you get paid? Or do you do it before getting paid, right? Or if you do it, how far back do you do it? Do you do it like a week before, a day before, right? Or if you do it when you get paid, that's good. But you should have, and you can kind of have this plan for yourself in place, right? Of more or less what it is. I mean, I know emergencies can pop up. You can even have a plan for emergency and budget emergency things in there, right? So let's get into loans. How to handle credit, how to handle credit cards. So for this, I think ultimately, if like let's say you're gonna take, you're going to use your credit card to buy something. Ideally, you should have the money to pay for that. And again, you're only using your credit card because you're trying to grow your credit history, right? Not so much because you don't have the money, right? If you don't have the money, you're risking it, right? And you may not be able to pay it back. So I wouldn't be playing with fire in that sense. But if you have the money, you can use a credit card. It's kind of like when you get a store credit card for something, right? And you can only use it in that store. Like you'll take something out and you'll pay it like monthly. Maybe you'll pay it for like 2-3 months, and then you'll just like end up paying it all because you have the money, right? Ideally, you should have the money. Or at the very least, you should pay on time, right? So never meddle with interest, because again, interest will take your credit history or your credit score down, and that's going to look bad because you're not going to get any loans in the future, and or you're going to get some bad loans approved only. So, and ultimately that's how banks make their money, right? I have this idea that if one day as a humanity or as a society we wanted to protest, we could protest in terms of money, like not buying something, right, or not taking out any loans, right? But we would all have to come together for something like that. Okay, so 2 more points left. The first one, I wanted to get into some statistics that I found very interesting. People that are in debt, nationally, globally, and individually. I asked ChatGPT, and the answer is more or less the same for different areas. For example, in Mexico, 70% of adults are in debt, and each individually owes 12,000 US dollars. In the United States, 77% of Americans are in debt, and each owes not 12,000 like in Mexico, but $96,000. And I guess it makes sense because in the US you kind of get stuck with mortgages, right, and things like that. And then I asked ChatGPT, in the world, like on average, just give me an average, 70 to 80% of adults are in debt. So again, we see Mexico 70, in the United States 77, adults 70 to 80%. So this means that out of 10 friends that you have, 7 to 8 of them are in debt, right? And in the world in general, each person owes around 30,000 US dollars, right? Now, of course, this can vary, and in debt doesn't mean that you're like bankrupt or you don't have any money and you owe so much money and you have all these things. In debt just means you could be like that, like just going, you're 1 month behind, right? But you keep up with payments and you never meddle with interest, right? And that's good. You're just building your credit history. That's all right, I think. And if you think about it that way, well, yeah, even I'm in debt, right? In little ways, right? Because you owe, like you have credit, so you owe that money, right? Okay, finally, I'm gonna get into the tips. There are 7 tips of budgeting here. There's the famous, I think everybody must know this one, the 50-30-20 rule. So the 50-20-30 rule means that 50% of your income goes to the needs. Again, prioritizing rent, your bills, right? Things like that. 50% of it goes to that. 30% goes to your wants. So I want a new pair of shoes. I want a burger. I want to go out this weekend, whatever, right? And 20% goes to savings, right? So you just put that away and you forget about it, right? That's savings. Okay, tip number 2 is the zero budget rule. The zero-based budget rule is every cent is assigned at the beginning of the month or at the moment that you're paid. So every cent is assigned. So it's zero-based budget because ultimately you should end up with zero difference, right? You shouldn't end up with more or with less, but zero. Everything is used, and you decide how you use it, right? There's this one too, which I heard about it, I think in some memes or some stuff like that a while back, the envelope system. So the envelope system is where you set aside money for different categories or for different spending categories, right? And you put this aside into envelopes, right? So you'll have like the rent envelope or the bills envelope. You'll have the entertainment envelope. You'll have the food envelope. You'll have the friends envelope. You'll have the, I don't know, if you buy video games or books envelope, right? And you can use that money up, but once there's no more money in a certain envelope, that's it, right? You can't like get any more, right? Which I think is kind of weird, but I mean, if it works for you, go ahead and use it. The 4th one is called pay yourself first. So this means that you pay. This is kind of like the opposite of prioritizing, because ultimately here what you're going to be doing is prioritizing your wants. So I want this and I don't care about my needs, like rent or bills. So you prioritize your wants and your savings, right? So I guess the savings part is good to my perspective, or based on my perspective. The 80-20 budget is the 5th one. The 80-20 budget, and again, we're dealing with percentages. You save 20% of your income, and the other 80%, you use it for all of the other expenses, right? The 6th one is called the 70-20-10 rule. So again, we're dealing with percentages, and I guess you can adapt the percentages to however you prefer. The 70-20 rule says 70% of your income goes to your living expenses, right? So bills, rent, 20% to savings, and 10% to debt repayment or charitable contributions. Now, the 10% religiously, and I think historically, is very relevant or pertinent because 10% in the Christian church is a diezmo in Spanish, or a tithe in English. And this is something that religion says you must give. Like if you're a Christian man at church, you should give, like on Sundays, 10% of your income. That's like the rule in religion, right? 10% of your income is what you give back to the church in the name of God, because God is helping you out, right? But again, that has to do, there's one that I didn't include here that has to do with your values. I thought it was kind of dumb, but again, this would be like your values, right? Like, what do you value? And that's how I'm going to budget, based on what my values are, right? Which I thought was like more emotional, less mathematical, but you could also do that. And the 7th one is the 60% solution. The 60% solution is 60% of your income goes to expenses and 40% to your savings and wants. So you could even divide that up like 20/20 or 10/30. And that's it. A lot of information. I spent actually a long time digging up all this information and writing it down, and I was very happy to make this episode, so I hope you enjoyed it. It's a very interesting topic, the psychology of money, finances, how to budget. Let me know if you got anything from this video, and that's all I got for this one, so I'll see you in the next one. All right, peace.